Hello, my name is Mark Arnaldo, and you may recognize me from my reviews of Infidel and Men of Iron. If you do, you will not be surprised to find out that today I'm reviewing Kulikovo 1380 Golden Horde, a game by Richard Berg, based on the same system that you have in Men of Iron. The game came out with the issue 18 of Against the Odds magazine in 2006, so just 1 year after Men of Iron, 5 years before Infidel, and I just like both those games, especially Infidel, so I just wanted to play an extra battle in that system. You know, I can play the battles in those two games again, but the adrenaline rush of a new battle in a system that you already know is priceless. Definitely worth the price of this magazine, which, by the way, is a very good magazine. It's a very good read. Anyway, the game came out pretty soon after Men of Iron, so I expected the game to be very close to Men of Iron, and I was extremely surprised and pleased when I found out that actually some of the ideas that I like a lot in Infidel were already here. So the seeds of those innovations in the system were planted pretty early after Men of Iron was released, and they would blossom later in Infidel. Now, since I like Infidel better than I like Men of Iron, of course, to me that is a great thing, that this game is the missing link between the two, but in a certain way feels pretty close to Infidel. The topic is the Battle of Kulikovo that was fought in 1380 by a coalition of Russian aristocrats against the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire. As the subtitle of the game says, that is the battle that broke the Mongol grip on early Russia, so an extremely important battle that had long political repercussions. So interesting topic, interesting system. Let's take a look. I want to tell you about some of the rules of Kulikovo so that you can get a sense of how this game is similar and or different from Men of Iron and Infidel. And again, I made a PowerPoint because I think it makes things clear. Here, like in Infidel and different from Men of Iron, missile units already have a range of 2x, so they already are less powerful than they are in Men of Iron. Continued attacks suffer cumulative -1, so that is something, again, pretty interesting that you have in Infidel. Very important to me is the countercharge, because I did not like too much the countercharge in Men of Iron. It seemed too powerful to me. In Men of Iron, a defending unit that manages to countercharge becomes the attacker, and the original attacker becomes the defender. In Infidel, this is much less powerful. In Kulikovo, it is not like in Infidel yet, but it is already less powerful than in Men of Iron. It is a step towards Infidel, definitely. Here, a countercharge against heavy or medium cavalry will annul the +2 die roll modifier that comes with the charge, but will not annul the charge itself. The attacker is still the attacker, the defender is still the defender, and the attack is still resolved on the charge table, not on the shock table. And then countercharges against other units, infantry missile units, are resolved like in Men of Iron with the role reverse, so the attacker becomes defender and defender becomes the attacker. But again, that does not happen with every unit. Now you already have the power of the countercharge being reduced, and I really like that. Also here you have the early concept of the overall commanders. Here you have in fact overall commanders that if they're stacked or adjacent to other leaders, give them a +1 activation rating. And the overall commanders can also give a beneficial + or -1 in combat to units that are stacked with them, and + or - depending if the unit is defending or attacking. But probably the most important innovation to me is the mounted archers. You already have the mounted archers that to me make the game Infidel so interesting. And they already have the same bag of tricks that they have in Infidel. Here, in fact, in Kulikovo, they can already leave an enemy zone of control by spending an extra movement point, and they can already fire during movement, and they have to spend +1 movement point in case they do that in a zone of control, but they can still do it. So here you already have the tactical option of having your mounted archers right in by the enemy, firing at the enemy, and then right away, which just adds so many options. There's just so many more things that you can do in the battlefield when you have these guys around. The map, as you can see, is very pretty, like the maps that you usually have in the games by Against the Odds. The map is also mostly functional. My only complaint is the regular slopes and the steep slopes really look similar to one another. So probably you will have to look at the map carefully before you set up the game so you know where the steep slopes are, because those are really important in terms of strategy, and in that way then you don't have to look too hard for them as you're playing the game. And the terrain featured on the map is extremely interesting. All of these dark lines that you see here are slopes, are changes in elevation. So this terrain is extremely hilly. It goes up here, then it goes down there again, and then up there. It's all just up and down. It's a maze of hills and different changes of elevations. And changes in elevation are important because, of course, they will slow down movement. They can block a line of sight for missile units, so well, being able to figure out how to use the changes of elevation to your advantage is a big thing in this game. Also, this area here and this other area here are covered with woods, and woods also will block the line of sight for missile units, will prevent charges from happening, so again, they need to be factored in. So it's a very interesting terrain, a lot of slopes and hills, and then here a bottleneck created by these two woods here. And it's not by chance that this location was chosen for the battle. The Russians in fact wanted such a terrain to minimize the impact of the Mongol light cavalry that, again, in this way would be slowed down and the capabilities of the mounted archers of the enemy would be minimized. This is the initial setup. This is the Russian side, and this other one is the Mongol side. Initial setup is pretty much symmetrical. Both armies have some infantry units and missile units in the front. This is the Russian infantry, this is the Mongol infantry, and then both armies have cavalry deployed in the back and all around, ready to ride around and to try and outflank the enemy. The infantry units of the two sides start pretty close from one another, as you can see from here, and so most likely early on in the game the two sides will advance one against the other. There will be an impact there, but the problem is that then you realize that the commanders for these infantry units are not the best ones in the game. It is not that easy to activate them. They do not activate that often, so once the fight starts it becomes hard to disengage from the fight, and the fight here in this area can get to a little bit of a stalemate because the two sides are actually quite balanced when it comes to infantry. They keep inflicting damage on one another, but the players will probably start wondering who is really gaining from this, because they will be receiving and inflicting more or less the same amount of flight points. So the players will probably start thinking that some other action is necessary to break the stalemate and make the situation favorable to them. And this is when this command here, which is not too far from the front line, really becomes important. Historically, this command, which is a very powerful cavalry command, was hidden here and in the woods, as you can see here, and the enemy had no idea that that command was there. So what happened historically is that part of the Mongol cavalry just started riding in this direction, trying to outflank this area here, and then these guys popped out of nowhere, attacked the flank and the rear of the enemy cavalry units, and they slaughtered them. It was such a massacre that really changed the course of the battle. So you have the option actually of not placing these units on the map at the beginning of the game. The owning player just writes on a piece of paper the initial location of these units, which can be anywhere on the map as long as it is in a spot where the Mongol units do not have a line of sight to. And then those units are brought in the game when the owning player decides to, or when a Mongol unit has a line of sight on them. But I suggest that you play the game historically at least once, because it is really a great experience. Maybe you can play solitaire, maybe it is easier that way. You just place those units there and you just then maneuver the Mongol units in such a way that, you know, as if they didn't know that there is an enemy command there. What I did was, when I was playing the Russian side, to move these units here to leave this flank open a little more appetizing, moving these units here as if they was reinforcing the front, but again, just to leave this area here open. At that point, the Mongol cavalry moved here. They got caught in the ambush. The infantry here retreated a little just to make it harder for them to get away, and really that was the move that basically won the game to the Russian side. What I think is particularly interesting is that first I read the rules of the game, then I set up the game, I started playing this solitaire game, and then only after the game was over, I read the article that comes with the magazine, and I found out that that was exactly the way in which things had developed historically. And to me, this is great because the game didn't feel scripted at all. My final conclusions may sound a little extreme, but they portray the way I feel about the game, so I'm just sharing my feelings with you. To me, this is the single best battle that you will find in the Men of Iron Infidel system. The single best one. Men of Iron was all about terrain and missile units and using those factors cleverly so that you could overcome the advantage that came from the other side having cavalry, but because of that, the game was a little static, let's face it. Infidel was all about cavalry and mobility and a lot of maneuverability, and because of that, you did not have many interesting terrain features, so that the capabilities of the cavalry units could be emphasized. It worked perfectly well there. But here in Kulikovo, you have the best of both worlds. You have a terrain which is extremely interesting, challenging, intriguing, full of options, possibilities, and traps. It can really be your worst enemy or your best ally. It depends on the way in which you use it. At the same time, you have the cavalry units, you have the mounted archers, and actually, if you play it well, you can still find ways in which those units can be really powerful and use their full capabilities. If you manage to attack your opponents at the same level of elevation in which the opponent is, then you basically annul the advantage that can come from terrain and different elevations. So I really feel that this game can feel more similar to Men of Iron or more similar to Infidel, depending on the way the players play. It can go either way, and that already gives you so much more flexibility than anything that you find in the other two games. I like the fact that you have many commands on the map, not just many units, but the battle, different areas of the battle can be activated, so the battle can really move from one area to the other. You may have a crisis in one area, and you have to decide if you want to concentrate there or start consistently activating units somewhere else. So you threaten another area of the battle, you distract your opponent. Just many options that you have. I like the commanders because both sides have some very good commanders, and then especially the Mongol player has many commanders that are way less competent, but the Russian player too. So either you accept this fact and you just have commanders that will activate less often, but then they can become sitting ducks there. Otherwise, you have the opportunity to use your overall commanders to improve the performance of your lower rating commanders. So you just have that extra option, and the way in which you manage the commander ratings of your commanders, again, it's a huge thing. That hidden command of the Russian player, that can change the game entirely. Position that in another location, you have a completely different game. Change things and house rule that the Mongol player knows about that command, can prepare against it and make arrangements. You have a different game. Just many different options. It is a game that has, to me, more interest in the what-if scenarios than other games have. I did not play any other game that was just drawing me in so much, that I felt had so many possibilities, so many decisions, that had such a level of richness and depth. This is really wargaming goodness. To me, again, the single best battle in the system and an absolute must for anyone who enjoyed Men of Iron or Infidel.